we are witnessing America as a failed social experiment.
How do we tell this story in a way that builds the kind of emotional momentum that colorblind ideology builds?
So many young brothers and sisters of the younger generation find themselves so far removed from the best of their past.
What are we going to make out of the nothing we've been given? How do you envision possibility? We're very lucky to have two people who are trying to push open the doors of the tent and to produce more diversity of position and to create the kind of conversation you're talking about. So, in fact, as some people watching may have not noticed, there are two women of color running for vice president this year. Before Kamala Harris was announced as Biden's running mate, there was Angela Walker, who is perhaps the coolest socialist truck driver in the country. And we'll get to that. But in addition to her full-time job during the day, she's campaigning as the Green Party's vice presidential nominee. And she joins us tonight with her running mate, Howie Hawkins. Angela, Howie, how are you? And welcome to the Tightrope.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you here. So we said a little bit about Angela's day job, and we've been hearing all week about Joe Biden's background. But tell us who you are, and tell our listening audience, more about yourselves each. Let's start with Angela.
Well, thank you. My name is Angela Walker. I am originally a native of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Currently living in Florence, South Carolina, where I am much happier. I am a truck driver. I've been a commercial driver for almost 20 years. Before I moved here, I served as the legislative director for the Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 998 in my home state, and ran against former Sheriff David Clark in Milwaukee County as an independent socialist in 2014. Our campaign pulled 20% of that vote, shocking everyone, myself included, broke socialist, unknown. And it got the attention of the Socialist Party of the U.S. And in 2016, I ran as their vice presidential nominee, actually making history this year as the first person to be nominated twice by the Socialist Party of the U.S. For vice president.
Wow. That's amazing. 20% is, that's fantastic. And Howie, tell our listeners a little bit about you.
Well, I'm a retired Teamster. I did construction work before that, but that was to pay the bills. I've been an activist since the 1960s. I came up in the San Francisco Bay Area where there was movements going on, civil rights and anti-Vietnam War, the early ecology movement. And I concluded back then, I asked the same question John Lewis asked at the March on Mars in 1963. I asked it in 1964, where is my party? The two parties were dragging on civil rights. And the next year, they both went into Vietnam and escalated that war radically. So I'm saying, where's my party? And my party first was the Peace and Freedom Party in 1968. And I supported the People's Party and the Citizens Party. And when we got a Green Party meeting together in 1984, first national organizing meeting, I was there, and I've been involved in this effort ever since. And the Greens in New York have run me for governor 3 times. Each time we got enough votes to get a ballot line for the next 4 years. And I've run for city council. Our emphasis is trying to build this party from the bottom up. So I ran for city council several times in Syracuse, New York, where I'm from. First time I ran, it was a 1.5%, 1993. Almost got elected in 2011. I got 48%.
Wow.
So we build a base, and that's the goal of this campaign, to get ballot lines so we can run local candidates. And we want to begin electing thousands of Greens and socialists to local office all across the country, get a foothold in government at that level, and build up in the state legislatures and Congress, and have a left in this country. Without a left, the Democrats move to the right. They accommodate neo-fascism. Carter or Clinton called it triangulation. And that's why the whole spectrum has moved to the right. We need a left. That's really what our campaign is. We're trying to build a movement here.
Right, right. We're going to
Well,
need to toss to Cory Booker pretty soon, but Cornell, go ahead and,
yeah, no,
keep us
no.
moving.
We
Okay.
Corey needs to be here now. He be part of this dialogue.
Yeah,
We
you
can
need
push
some.
our brother. We can push our brother because I think it's fairly clear to many of us that the Green Party is much more of a truth-telling party than any of the other parties that we know. Now we've got the People's Party on the way, with Brother Nick Brown and others. And I'm going to be there with him as well. But the real challenge is, how do you translate the kind of truth telling that you all do in the Green Party on the ground to get the kind of traction such that you not just have broad appeal, but you become a social force that has to be dealt with, even in this moment in which neo-fascism is so
Widespread.
growing. Let me put it that way. It's growing.
Yeah.
Well, I would say in this election, the question is, how are you going to vote against Trump? If you're a socialist or a progressive, you give your vote to Biden, you just voted against Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, deep military spending cuts, taking on this new nuclear arms race. You get lost in the sauce. They don't know you're a socialist. And if you vote for Biden, you voted for Biden, the neoliberal hawk. You vote for the Greens, everybody understands what that vote means. And the more votes we get, the less likely the left is going to be taken for granted. Whoever gets elected and they'll have to deal with us.
So are you suggesting there's no danger in ending up with Trump in that scenario, and or that there's no difference, or that it really wouldn't make any difference?
Well, certainly in a state like New York or California, where Trump is down, like in New York, 25 points consistently since the spring, there the question is real clear.
Right.
Where it's close, I mean, look at the national outcomes, what it looks like. Right now, Trump is way behind, including in the battleground states. So, people can make that calculation when the vote comes. But I'm saying, if you want a left, you gotta give it some support. If you don't, you're not going to have a left. People think it's too marginal. It's not there. So we got to settle for neoliberalism. And that's not what the people need.
Yeah. Sister Angela, do you want to jump in on it? You see.
Just to add to that, I mean, at this point, people have been very vocal about the policies that they are most interested in having, Medicare for all being one of those, marijuana decriminalization and legalization being another one. And it just seems to me that for a major political party to be able to, they've heard these demands and are still choosing to ignore them and demanding essentially that because they're not the other guy, we're less bad. Even though we're not going to give you what you want, you're still, you should still show up and support us. I think that that's arrogant. I think that certain segments of the population, our vote has been taken for granted way too long. And I think that, of course, to answer your question, Tricia, there's always a danger of the incumbent retaining office, which we can agree nobody wants. But at the same time, we've been kicking the can down the road. It's always too risky to support what you actually believe in. At some point, you're going to have to pull a pin. You're going to have to jump.
Yeah, but I don't see pulling that pin now. I have to say. I mean, that Trump, you are right. I used to say that when it was what I would call the previous iteration of relatively civilized Republican neo-fascists. But this, it does feel categorically different. But I get your point is very well taken. Very well taken. Would you think that we would be in the same scenario had Bernie been the Democratic nominee? In other words, how would you position yourself vis-a-vis that potential outcome?
Well, we'd still have issues. Military spending, the new nuclear arms race, support for Palestinian rights. BDS, that's what got Linda Sarsour thrown out, I guess. Bernie wasn't for that. And We don't want the left to be taken for granted. I think what you have happen in the Democratic Party is they let progressives make speeches, but the corporate Democrats make the decisions. And to remain a player in the Democratic Party, people like Bernie Sanders make compromises. And I was surprised when he said to Ali Velshi on MSNBC, I'm compromising on Medicare for all. I'll go with Biden, 55 and older and the children, but in between, we're going to have the ACA and a public option to buy into Medicare, which is the public option is more expensive than Medicare. I mean, that was the program of the other Democrats running, and Bernie's adapted to that. And so that undermines, when you want Medicare for all, Bernie's now legitimizing a retreat, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
But it's true that anytime you're dealing with the treacherous terrain of politics in which big money and big military have already colonized it, that some kind of decisions are going to be made that have to do with concessions you get rather than just caving in. Because you're right. I mean, the corporate wing of the Democratic Party, for the most part, have caved in. But you're struggling for concessions. How do you come to terms with this struggling for concessions when, as a Green Party, and of course, I do want to invoke my dear brother Bruce, who was one of the great visionary thinkers in the last 50 years, who was a member of the Green Party. But how do you talk about concessions on the one hand, and on the other hand, hold on to your principles and your vision and your ideals? Because if all concessions are compromised, then you have no politics at all.
Well, I think when we run is on our own platform and make the politicians come to us, we get concessions. I'll give you an example. 2014. Andrew Cuomo was first challenged by a guest you're going to have on tonight, Zephyr Teachout, in the primary. She got about 190,000 votes. And then I ran in the general, and we had some of the same demands, like a ban on fracking and a $15 minimum wage. And in that general election, I came up with 5% of the vote. And that was the year Andrew Cuomo wanted to run up the vote, get ready to run for president, get more votes than his father, Mario Cuomo, ever got, get more votes when he was first elected in 2010, and he got less. He couldn't take us for granted. And after that election, he adopted several policies he had never supported before that we had campaigned on. The ban on fracking, a $15 minimum wage, a millionaire's tax, paid family leave. And that's what happens when we stand our ground and make the politicians come to us, particularly when some of these demands have majority support, like Medicare for all. Absolutely. So I think you're better off telling the politicians what you want with your vote than just giving it away, and they're going to do what they want and take you for granted, ignore you. Mm-hmm. So we do have leverage. We don't have to win the office to change the calculation of the politicians in office.
So you got concessions on both sides. The people themselves getting concessions from capital, from the bosses, from the ruling classes, and then the ruling classes themselves having to make concessions when the people themselves bring power and pressure to bear. You're saying it's a mutual two-sided street in that regard.
Well, in elections, I think you stand for what you want. If you're like collective bargaining with the boss, at some point you got to decide whether you want to stay out on strike or go out on strike, or whether you're going to accept the offer and what concessions you got. And then the members, they vote. We're going to accept this contract, or we're going to keep fighting. And so, inevitably you end up in situations like that. And then, you don't get everything, but you get the best you can.
Yeah, because that's in this moment. Last time I was with Sister Jill, and I would do it again. I was with Brother Ralph. I would do it again. But when one's heart is actually with what you all stand for, and you're in a moment where the fascism is so intense.
Cornell, I'm so sorry. They want us to cut to the convention very quickly and watch this tribute to John Lewis.
Oh, okay. We'll
sorry about that, Cornell.
No, that's cool.
John Lewis had the respect of everybody because he was the one who demonstrated the most courage. He'd been beaten and knocked down and get up and go to find another battle. John was focused on ending voter suppression, and it wasn't that he was a great orator, it's that he was a great spirit. The power of spirituality and humility, and the willingness to suffer rather than to inflict suffering.
One of the things that John has taught us is that, yeah, you may have to sacrifice, but if you're sacrificing for a cause, something bigger than you, and you really believe in it, then you will have people following you.
We do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress. We will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham.
I think he is the singular figure that has tried to carry out the work of our nonviolent campaigns into the halls of Congress.
From day one, John Lewis was a role model for the members of Congress, whether they were freshmen or here a long time, because he brought with him a kind of heft, a weightiness of purpose.
I got arrested a few times during the 60s. 40 times. And since I've been in Congress, another 5 times. The means by which we struggle must be consistent with the end we seek.
Someone who has navigated thorny issues of policy, not by castigating alone, but by also encouraging people to be better than they think they can be.
Today we are considering a fair housing measure which not only protects our nation's minorities, but it protects the needs of those with disabilities and families with children. How long do we have to wait before we decide to ban assault weapons? We have another opportunity to bring more of our citizens into political participation. I have on my marching shoes. That's right. I'm fired up. I'm ready to march.
And all of these decades later, while he and others of his generation achieved much, we're still fighting against police brutality and fighting for our voting rights. And so we best honor him by continuing to fight the good fights that he fought, by staying in good trouble.
Up, but we want to give Howie and Angela a little time, so let's come back to Howie and Angela so that we don't lose them for the night. I think, Cornell, you were asking a question. Do you happen to remember? I know that was a lot of distraction there.
Oh Lord, exactly. Yeah, I forgot. The sister Angela and brother Howie, remember what I was talking about?
I think it was about the concessions. We were talking about concessions.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was talking about my own situation in which so much of my heart is with Sister Angela and Brother Howie and how it was with Jill or Ralph in the past. And yet this time with the neo-fascism coming so intensely, especially on poor and working people, that it's hard not to cast a vote for a milquetoast, mediocre neoliberal like Biden, to push Trump out, and then to try to hope that we can intensify a critique and a creation of a party outside of the two-party system once the fascist is gone. Now, I mean, that's my particular analysis at the moment, and that's where I do have some differences with my dear Brother Howie and Sister Angela, and yet I can understand their argument, their praxis.
Yeah. Howie, Angela, did you want to follow up?
And I mean, we've had this, I've had this conversation. My
100
grandmother
times.
Well, my grandma's 80. I mean, you're not going to tell your grandma, you're going to go vote for, I'm your granddaughter. You should show up and vote for me. I'm not going to do that. I mean, I understand exactly why people are afraid. They're concerned. They're reluctant. And I get it. And you don't castigate people for feeling what they're feeling about the timeline that we're living in. This is harsh. It's frightening. Yes. The implications of someone like this individual that is currently occupying the White House, continuing to occupy the White House, are very frightening. And at the same time, as y'all mentioned, when at the top of the show, these conditions are not new to us. And in certain of our communities, this has been our reality for a very, very long time. And so I understand the need to be cautious. But once you elect the less bad, and we have seen this, elect the less bad individual to office, where is their incentive to do what you want them to do? You've given them your vote. They have their place. And if the policies that you want going in are not in their platform to begin with, where is your leverage to make them all of a sudden adopt those policies? What leverage do you have? Your voice is your vote. Unless, I'm not, not talking about the folks in the street who are really the ones that get anything done in the first place. I would argue that activists and organizers are the reason that we've ever gained anything. But when do you stop conceding? And one of the good things for me about being on the left is I'm not beholden to anybody about what I say, what I stand on. It's either, this is our truth. And if you're not with it, then you're not with it. I'm not going to castigate anybody for it, but I'm digging my heels in and I'm not backing down either.
I think the issue is, how do we fight the right? We get Trump and, his cronies out of there, but the fascists are still there. They've always been there. These are the Dixiecrats. These are the Goldwater Republicans that mobilized the white backlash. And, when they marched on Washington, John Lewis and them, their analysis, from A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin, leaders in the Socialist Party, and the organizers of that march were the Yitzhals, the Young People's Socialist League. And they pulled that together. And their analysis was, we need to win, as we move from civil rights to human rights, as they put it, economic human rights for everybody, to undercut this white backlash. And that was the Economic Bill of Rights: to a job, a guaranteed income above poverty, a housing program so everybody was housed and so forth, and getting out of Vietnam and putting that money into what the people need. And the Democrats had a majority in both houses in that period. They had Lyndon Johnson in the presidency, and they didn't pass that Economic Bill of Rights, which Roosevelt had first brought up in his last two State of the Union addresses, 1944 and 1945. And because we didn't win that Economic Bill of Rights back then, the white backlash is now in the White House. And their Democrats, think of Clinton when he brought out his law and order program running for president. He went to Stone Mountain, spiritual home of the Ku Klux Klan, with a bunch of prisoners behind him, mostly black. You know what the message there was? Like you said, the neoliberals are more subtle, but the imagery was real clear. I mean, Donald Trump would have loved that as a photo op. So we can't rely on the Democrats to fight the right. They accommodate them, triangulation and all that. So, the classic case was the socialists in Germany backed a conservative to stop Hitler. Conservative won and appointed Hitler as the chancellor. And so you get behind the lesser evil, it just opens the door to greater evils. We need to stand for what we stand for.
Yeah. Well, we're so grateful to have both of you here. I mean, it's important. This is at the heart of what we need to be tussling about. It's not about Biden per se. It's about the entire process. and what options we have and how to leverage them and how to hold on, as Angela said, and when to dig your heels in, how to dig your heels in, and how to allow for people to have different points of view, as all of us have said at one point or another here. Thank you so much for joining us on the Tightrope tonight. And we really appreciate it. And we hope to see you soon. I know Cornell wants to say his so longs.
Well, one, I'm just so glad to not just have your voices here, but have people recognize that you all are part of the great tradition in this empire of fighting for freedom and justice. Long distance runners, you all have been in your own distinctive ways. I know Brother Howie, he's got to be one of the more long distance runners when it comes to freedom fighting, going all the way back. So you got to go to somebody like Bob Ovakian in terms of a long distance revolutionary. I might have a lot of disagreements with that brother, but he's been at it a long time. Howie's the same way. Sister Angela, you were younger, very wise, part of the same tradition, same struggle for freedom. And we will be seeing each other on the streets, hitting the jails, telling the truth. Because the Green Party, my comrades, fellow freedom fighters, we might agree on this particular strategy, but at the deepest level, the truths that you all are telling need to be heard in this nation. And that's one of the reasons why we are blessed to have you all on this show.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you.